Welcome to your Essential Business Briefing. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, COVID-19's impact on creative industries. We'll speak to the UN's Cultural Agency about its call for better social protection for artists. They're the essential arteries of the global economy, but how do we make cargo ships pollute less? And we go behind the scenes with the bargain hunters finding the cheapest products for discount supermarket chains. First up, 10 million jobs were lost in the creative industries in 2020 due to the pandemic. That's according to a report from the UN's cultural agency UNESCO, which says the slump represented a loss of $750 billion to the global economy. The organisation says the pandemic has magnified the already precarious working conditions of artists around the world. Let's speak now to Berta Sancristóbal from UNESCO, who coordinated the team that compiled this report. Thanks very much for coming in to us. What did you find then about the impact of the pandemic on the creative industries? How badly was the industry damaged?
The industry was actually very badly damaged, but I think also the crisis what did is put on the spotlight the fragilities, the vulnerabilities that already existed before. If we speak in terms of losses, I think you just mentioned it, the UNESCO estimate put them at 10 million jobs and about $750 billion losses, which equivalents to like 20 to 40% of the revenues generated by the cultural and creative industries. So it's indeed a big impact, and it's actually much bigger than the industry's impact while during the 2008 global financial crisis.
So a really big hit then for a very big industry around the world as well. Talk to us about what happened to workers. We talked about that loss of jobs, but people lost more than that as well.
Yes, I mean, they lost a lot of jobs. There was a lot of measures put in place by governments, but it is important to know that just like other sectors, like media sectors, for instance, there's a lot of self-employed, a lot of freelancers, and many of these measures were not taking them into account. So even if in very good faith states were mobilizing safety net for artists, a lot of them were not eligible to them. And there are examples both in the developed and the developing world, actually.
And you're highlighting in this report the situation that happened broadly in the sector of things moving to digital. We had venues being closed, so artists weren't able to perform, writers weren't able to see their products made. So much more is being consumed online. We all did it. What did that mean for artist incomes?
That's a very good question. Just a small nuance, because of course not all the arts were able to be consumed and accessed online. So in terms of streaming, we're going to speak about musicians, we're going to speak about perhaps filmmakers as well, but there is a whole part of the sector that could not even go online. But if we talk about the ones who got online, indeed, what the artists put into the streaming platforms is much less than what they get back in their pocket. And that's what we call like the monetization models. They're currently not sustainable. There is a lot of debate about how to make them more sustainable and make more balance the share between artists, producers/labels, and the actual streaming platforms. And there's actually a very recent study that we are using in our UNESCO report by the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is actually putting forward an idea of a new model that would allow, at the same time, states to protect the licensing agreements that already exist between labels and streaming platforms, but at the same time to put in place a direct revenue for the artists that would be handled by a system that is already in place in all countries of the world, which is the collective management societies. So this is just an idea put forward, but I'm sure this is going to lead to more discussions in the years to come.
So that's something that we could see change from an industry point of view. What about what governments can do here? You talked about this gap of how our creative workers didn't have the same protections. Were there examples of places that did manage to create a system to support the creative industries during the pandemic?
I think there are quite a bit of, there are quite a few examples of measures called emergency measures, but I think the most interesting examples are the ones where those emergency measures end up becoming like state law. There is the case of Italy, for instance. There was an emergency measure put in place just for the pandemic that has actually just been endorsed as a state law in August 2021, which changes for instance, just an example, it changes the calculation method of remuneration in parental leave, in sick pay. So, and this is now becoming a state law. There are other examples in other parts of the world. Perhaps I can quote the Republic of Korea. There's the Welfare Artists Act. It's an old act, but it was amended in May 2020 so that creative and cultural workers who had been contracted before the pandemic, they are now entitled to unemployment benefits up to 60% of Korean monthly average salary, for instance. So there are examples, and they are not. And actually, also, from the report, we carried out a survey for the last 4 years, between 2017 and 2020. And when we find out is that half of the countries that reported, that amounts to around 50 countries, they have reported economic measures to protect the social welfare of artists. There are much less measures when it comes to actual income protection. So this is a clear trend that comes out of this report.
What's the ideal model then that you'd be recommending for countries to try to implement if they're looking to do something new for artists?
I don't think I can recommend an ideal model, to be honest. There is a lot of discussions about issues that have also affected other sectors, like the universal basic income. We've heard new calls around universal basic income and protection of income in the cultural and creative sectors, in Ireland, in Canada. But the important is to keep the discussion going. Already, if there is an acknowledgement, which is not the case in a lot of countries, that the cultural and creative professions, it's an actual profession, it's an actual workers. In a lot of countries, they don't even are recognized as workers. So this is like the very first acknowledgement that needs to happen, that may be taken for granted in a number of countries, but it is not in another. So what basically UNESCO position is starting with the recognition of a professional status so that they can be then claim the same or equivalent rights than other worker groups.
And of course, the idea is that we all end up with more culture for ourselves to be able to enjoy as well. Berta de Sancristóbal from UNESCO, thank you very much for coming in to speak to us.
Thank you.
Next, to a crucial part of the global economy that's also a major polluter. Cargo ships transport around 90% of global trade and make up 3% of carbon emissions. In an effort to reduce that, shipping companies are switching to natural gas. But environmental groups want them to go further and invest in cleaner hydrogen-based fuel. Wasim Cornet has more.
A gigantic cargo ship and its fueling ship. They're at a harbor in southern France for a unique experiment.
We know that we're pioneers. We know we're moving forward. And we know we're making history in cargo shipping.
For the first time at this specific location, a cargo ship will be fueled using LNG, liquefied natural gas. The operation is difficult and tedious. The gas must be maintained at a temperature of minus 161 degrees Celsius, and it takes 15 hours to transfer 6,000 cubic meters of LNG. And although ships operating on LNG cost more than traditional fuel-powered cargo ships, the company has opted to begin using them because they emit 20% less carbon, and they're not alone. The International Maritime Organization wants to cut carbon emissions from shipping by 40% by 2030 and by 70% by the year 2050. The push comes from stricter environmental regulations and also from corporations themselves. IKEA, Amazon, and Michelin are among several companies that have pledged to make their maritime shipping carbon neutral within 20 years.
This is what customers are increasingly asking for. Companies have understood that the environmental stakes are high, and it will all boil down to the carbon footprint of cargo.
But how to make the world's 50,000 cargo ships green? Some engineers favor synthetic fuels and even nuclear energy. Others want to go back to basics, like this sail-operated cargo ship, which will soon carry the Ariane rocket to French Guiana.
Trying to put sails on a cargo ship used to be a radical idea. But soon it will be profitable, and it'll help shipping companies be more competitive.
Whatever the fuel, the journey to green shipping will be a long one.
As inflation remains high here in France, consumers are shopping around for the lowest prices. That's good news for discount supermarket chains. who save money on having fewer staff and simpler shop fixtures. But sourcing the cheapest products is also a big part of the business, as Emerald Maxwell now reports.
Popping up all over France, with dozens of new branches every year, discount stores have never been as popular.
Compared to supermarket prices, well, there's no comparison.
This shop specialises in clearance stock, selling products 4 times cheaper than usual.
This jumper is usually sold for $39.99, but we're selling it for $8.99.
Dispensing with decor and in-store music, its bare-bones approach keeps costs low. But the real key to its rock-bottom prices lies in these offices. 300 buyers track down bargains from across the world.
然后它的那个数量呢，数量也是跟之前一样嘛，每款都是。
En plazo de 5 días laborativos te voy a tener ya una propuesta.
Oui, bonjour. Je voulais savoir si actuellement vous aviez des choses à nous proposer en déstockage. Il y a plein de raisons qui font.
There are lots of reasons why products might need to be cleared. Sometimes it's got a short shelf life if it's food, or the packaging is damaged, or it could be returns from suppliers.
These pencils, for instance, were made for Christmas. The supplier wants to clear 500 boxes that weren't sold. But first, the store carries out some market research.
I'll give Camille the maximum price we're willing to go to for this item, and I'll also give her the key arguments which will help her in negotiations with the supplier.
On average, 1 in 3 negotiations are successful. Other discount stores cut costs in areas like logistics.
What's special about this lorry is that it's higher and the floor is lower than a traditional truck, so it can transport 60% more goods, which means we use fewer lorries and less petrol.
Since the start of the year, French law prohibits unsold food items from being destroyed, presenting another opportunity for these discount stores.
That's all from us for now, but you'll find this and all of our previous programmes available to watch on our website and as a podcast wherever you usually listen. And we're on social media for your comments and questions. Until next time, thanks for watching.